Okay, well, hi everyone, and thank you very much to everyone watching or listening around the world. Liam Hartree back with you today for another episode of the Simply Inspired podcast. And today I'm joined by a very, very special guest who I'm really quite honored to bring to the show because this man has had a remarkable life so far, more to come as well, has been on a remarkable inner journey, shall we call it. I hope that does that justice in words. But today's guest, Mr. Aindriu Peers. Now, I hope I'm saying it the right way. The Irish pronunciation, the Irish spelling of that, for anyone who can see, I've probably messed that up. And I would like to do a quick introduction. I'll come back to your name now because this man, get this, guys, because you don't hear this every day. We're talking over 20 years as a Trappist monk, talking meditation practice since 1984, koan training, over 10 years of that. He is a Celtic Buddhist priest as well, Celtic meditation teacher, shadow coach, and published author, and of course, a shamanic guide, I suppose, would be one term to use, although we can certainly clarify some of these. I'm not really a big fan of labels because today, as I was saying before we started, I'm not trying to promote any particular path to you, the viewers, in any way, shape, or form. I'm only trying to show you that there are different paths you could take, there are different levels of awareness you could awaken to. And when you look within and take time to look within, it is astonishing what else has come back. Now, it's not always an easy journey, but it is always a worthwhile journey. And that is the purpose of today's Zoom, to help any of you who are lost, confused, looking for answers, starting out on the path, not sure which path to take, maybe partway along a certain path, not sure if you're taking the right one. This comes in many forms. So stay tuned. And my friend, thank you so much for joining. I'm sorry about messing up your name. We can start with the correct way to say it, please. Let's start there.
Well, let's start with the surname because it's Peers, yeah, not Peters, I think. So, and then Andrew is just Andrew. It's just spelled the Gaelic way.
I think I said Piers, but I might still be slurring a little bit since this facial paralysis that I've had. So bear with me on
If you
that.
said that wrong, then my hearing's going. So,
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We'll see. But
ringing.
I might be a little bit, or it could be the Welsh accent as well. But anyway, it's wonderful of you to join us today. And like I said before we started recording, I know that this manner of speaking, I know it's something you do from time to time, but I also know that you're not really here to promote anything. As you said, you're just here to share your journey because I asked you to, but I'm still very grateful for you making the time for that. I really do mean that. Because, it's not everyone's cup of tea, as they say, doing this type of podcast. And I think that we will be delving a little bit deep into your life. Now, I'm not sure how you personally think of this, but I can see obviously the transitional nature of your journey. But before we get into monkhood and we get into the Trappists and the Buddhists and Celtic Buddhism, I'd like to enlighten people about that. I've read that you were a punk, you were a bit of a punk going back a few years before this. So I would like to go back in time a little bit to, of course, time is also an interesting subject, but I'd like to go back in the linear regards of that to your early life and the beginning. Now, I'm not sure if you'd like to discuss the beginning as in where you were born, or if you'd like to discuss the beginning from the start of your spiritual awakening. And I leave that open to you because it's your life. But let's go back to what you term the beginning of, at least of different modes of awareness, anyway. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you could really, because it's all interwoven, you can start anywhere really. And it's like everybody's story. I'm not any different to that. But I do know I had the great privilege of discovering something in myself only after many, many years of meditation, trauma that came up from before my birth. So you could say the story started there. Um, because I think I was a twin. and the twin didn't make it. Now, this is really weird stuff. It's probably not the best way to start because it makes me look like a weirdo, which I probably am in some people's eyes anyway. But I would say that these are for me facts because I've worked through it. Yeah, the dreams have come up, and a kind of cell-like memory has come up. The body stores all our memories in one way or another. Um, and with me, I had a brother. I mean, I had another brother later. He was born a couple of years later, but this was I was in the womb with this guy, and he didn't make it, and uh, that was even then probably first trimester as well. Such a terrible, because at that stage there's no two, there's only one. Your consciousness hasn't separated from anything anywhere, but you feel this going away of something, and you think in your confusion, in your limited awareness, that it's yourself. So it feels like you're losing yourself. This is really difficult to um, uh, digest or give words to, or the pain of it, the sheer psychic pain, is kind of buried for a long time, and it's only later on in life, especially through love relationships, that this sort of thing gets dug up. So, Liam, I mean, when we're talking about shadow stuff, I can go on for a long time, but I would say that in my personal legends, in my personal story, fairy tale, that was a very decisive thing that seemed to happen, and it was one that overshadowed my first half of my life anyway, and I only became aware of it through sorting out a lot of other stuff, and then it was clear enough for that at the right time. These things come out at the right time. For me, it was after I think about 20 years of fairly intensive meditation, that this wordless scream came out, this silent scream, a terrible scream, and you have to investigate because you can't walk around this one without shutting everything down again. And I was in the business with myself of trying to discover the shadow and the rejected parts of myself.
Absolutely. I think that's a very good place to start. Actually, I mean, I know you said people might think it's a bit strange, but I actually think it's a very good place to start because, well, first of all, by the way, before we go any further, I sometimes find myself saying this to people. I feel I should say at this point, when we're talking about some of the subjects that we'll be talking about today, I know you teach on them and speak on them extensively, and you've been teaching for many years, but it still takes courage to speak openly about these things that most people spend a lot of their lifetime running from or repressing or denying and so forth. So, I think that's actually a wonderful place to start. Now, when it comes to, I will start with, as we say, with the awareness. So you mentioned this psychic pain, you mentioned having that for a lot of the early part of your life. But people who are not sure where to go on the spiritual path, or they have some type of awareness, but they don't know what it is or how to access it. Maybe it happens intermittently. That's the reason why I'm asking, because every question I have has a purpose behind it. It's not just, well, because I'm curious. I'm always thinking of people who benefit from this. And there's a few personal aspects I'd like to know as well. But when it comes to the any form of meditation, prayer, awareness of energy, awareness of other people's energy. I mean, obviously, this started from birth, before birth. I understand that completely. In terms of this lifetime and your upbringing and growing up and everything, where did it start, or what sort of an age did you start to be curious about spiritual practices or aware of? people's energies, or whichever form that took first, if it's something we can even narrow down, which I'm not sure it might be, but I'd like to narrow it down a little bit just for those people who are experiencing those things and not sure what to do with them. That's my reason for asking this one, you know?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, that pre-birth stuff, I wasn't aware of it until much later, as I said. So that although it was there, I didn't know it was there. I was blissfully ignorant. Yeah. So, but the key point, I think, for me, the metanoia point, the beginning of waking up, would be when I was about 23, 24, with a mystical experience. Whoa. So I was. Let me think, which came first? The first step actually was letting go of the rope that my father was on the other end of. So I was in a battle with my father. I was in unforgiveness towards him because of things that had happened. No physical abuse or anything like that, but psychological. It was his world that I was still in. Uh, and he was the boss of that. And so I rebelled eventually. And then there was this war. And then I eventually got so tired and ill, actually. And um, that I just, one day, I let go of the rope, is the way I put it. I just forgave. I didn't even tell him that hey, Dad, I've forgiven you for all those things. No, I just let it go. I didn't fight anymore. And many years later, he admitted to me he didn't know what the hell happened, but overnight, or the same day, it all just changed. So that was important for me because unforgiveness, not forgiving someone, is a way of punishing yourself twice. There's the actual situation that was hurting you, plus your resentment of it is hurting you twice. And you're blocking the flow of energy within you. And that's the point. So when I saw that it wasn't actually bringing me anything, I forgave him. So I forgave him really for myself, yeah, so that I could be free. And of course, it helped him as well. But the main reason was to set myself free. And then when I turned away from all that, turned away actually from being a kind of God unto myself, then I turned around and I met within me a presence. Uh, and that was the first of three little mystical experiences. So this presence was, at the time I felt in a cage, that there was a dead end. Actually, yeah, in my spirit, I came to a cliff edge. And out there, where I was tempted to jump, was pure black nothingness. And I knew in my guts that to jump into that would mean um, some form of insanity or giving up responsibility for myself, yeah, for what I said and what I did, and just losing it, as they say, properly. But I was scared. I turned around. I didn't want to do that. I got scared, turned around. Didn't seem a good idea to me, not a clever idea to do that. Turned around, and the door to the prison was open. So it's just that I've been going in one direction all the time, basically telling everyone to F off. And I didn't need anybody, and I was going to do it myself. And I turned around, and there was nobody running after me or trying to. Instead, I found this wonderful presence. And then I knew that the direction wasn't my way, it was that way. So then, you know, just turned around and got on with it. That's the way I tend to be when I see what the truth is. and I know what the truth is, and I go for it 100%.
Absolutely. It makes a lot of sense, actually. And one of the things that, on a very practical level with this, is that I think is so valuable is that so many people will relate to what you're saying. And that is one of the things, by the way, that the journey, obviously, it's an inner journey that you've been on. I mean, life is an inner journey anyway, fundamentally. But at the same time, I feel that there's so many aspects of what you're saying that are relatable and meaningful to people in that relatability. And you were saying about being in a cage and being in a prison, and I hope that what we're doing today will actually uh, encourage some people that they don't have to be in a similar type of prison and maybe even open the door for them. So that's a very, very valuable place to start. See, there we are. Look, it's happening again with my face, the light in the dark. There's definitely symbology there. I'll adjust the lighting now. But I would also like to talk about obviously the monkhood itself, the renunciate lifestyle, the 20 plus years, I believe, that you spent as a Trappist. Now, I'm not sure the exact timeline of this. Actually, I am because it is on your LinkedIn. But over 20 years in there, on a very physical level, I mean, it's an extraordinary commitment to make in a lot of ways. And what I'd really like to do, I mean, I don't mind where this one goes, by the way, because obviously it's your experience, not mine. But I would like to talk about, first of all, that decision to enter the monastic lifestyle, but also a little bit about what life was like in there, because I feel that people will find it fascinating. Now, I am saying to our audience, you don't have to become a monk to necessarily solve
But
your problems, although it is an option for some people. But I think that people will be fascinated to hear about that, my friend. And I think that it's very relevant because that's such an important part of your inner journey. But over 20 years, it's amazing. So let's start with a decision to actually enter that lifestyle. While you're talking, I'm just adjusting this because the sun is setting here. I'll
sure,
cut.
sure.
There we are. That's a bit better. Yes, sorry about that. So yes, the decision to enter that kind of lifestyle, broadly speaking, what a change from the day-to-day life that most people live, and a source of curiosity. So how did that decision come about initially, please? Let's start there.
That was definitely a direct result of those three little mystical experiences, one of which I just described. So then it's a case of, oh shit, there is a God. There is a God. Yeah. He exists. It exists. And then taking the fullness of that on board. And also, so like my other encounter with that um, fact that the truth exists was also was a personal mystical one when I was touched by this unconditional love. Unconditional love. What the hell is that? I had no idea. I had absolutely no idea. The way I was brought up was you do this and we give you that and we love you when you do. So I was kind of like a pleaser. I learned uh, to earn love by doing things, by pleasing people. Yeah, I was a bit of a chameleon, so I would pick up because I had to, because of my domestic situation, household situation, the moods of people. You know, because very often in my household, the adults were actually behaving like children, and we had to be the adults. You may recognize that as well. But this was my first experience of unconditional love, and my to keep it short, my reaction was, okay, I want to give everything back, you know, because that's love. You know, I feel I've received everything. I want to stay in touch with that. I want to give everything the way I've just received it, this new kind of life. So I even opened it out to becoming all my options out to becoming a religious or something. You know, I didn't really think about the celibate parts and all the other bits till, you know, perhaps much later on. But all I did was go around a few religious houses and offer myself, really. I was just giving back. That was it. And I remember thinking, damn, I really don't want to go to the Trappists. They're too tough. But that's the way it seemed to go. So I followed that, offering myself. And of course, you get screened. I had a double screening in my case because he was experimenting with screening styles, the novice master was. But nobody ever said no. And I just kept going. I didn't really, if it was down to me, if I had that kind of awareness then, I don't think I would have become a monk. I think my brother, yeah, in the womb, guy I lost, I think he was the monk. So I think there was a lot of confusion going on around there. I was a newly converted traditional Catholic, so that's like I'm still Catholic, but I've converted after going away from the church for a while. A lot of confusion, and I just kept going, and nobody kind of stopped me. So yeah, a kind of backward entrance into monastic life. Yeah, and monastic life is completely, at least for the Trappists, I would not say in every house either, but in the particular monastery that I entered in Mount St. Bernard's in England, it's a very tough place. Yeah, it's a culture of real silence, which is something that you learn from the monks and from imitating and doing what they do in the sort of life that they follow. Um, it's ascetic, so it meant getting up at 3:15 every morning, every day of the week, every week of the year, and there are no holidays and stuff like that. It's pretty full on, yeah. But it's a great place to um, to grow in self-knowledge, as they say, because community life, especially in an enclosed community, is very intense. You're seeing the same guy, and he may not like you. Whatever you do, he may not like you. You're seeing the same guy all day long, every day. Well, you may not be working with him or something, but you'll be eating with him in the refter, and you'll be seeing him regularly, and you'll be meeting in the corridor, and there'll be that that feeling again, and just the discipline, the sheer discipline of the life will bring things up. And of course, you're adding prayer to that, contemplative prayer, which is a bit like the Buddhist form of formless meditation, where you're just being still and quiet in the presence of this unconditional love, really. So that's when you start getting plowed up good and proper. Yeah.
Well, what a description, because I think for many people it seems like another world. And I know that obviously there are certain people, and obviously Thomas Merton and certain individuals who popularize descriptions of this to a certain degree. And I also think unless you've experienced this directly as you have, it's not really something people can do justice in words, although you certainly come close to that. When it comes to this as well, was I correct in saying it's over 20 years that you were a monk? 21 years, I believe I came across. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow,
21 years. Yeah.
remarkable.
21 years. I have in 3 communities, I have to say. I was the longest ever, I think, for the order, the longest ever serving temporary professed monk. So there are various stages. You become a postulant, 6 months in the monastery. First of all, they make you wait a few years. In my case, anyway, they made me wait about 3 years because they probably didn't know what to, who is this guy? It looks a bit shifty. A bit of my punk days was, still working its way out of me, just in physical mannerisms and things, the way I walked. In a couple of monasteries, the monks made comments about the way I walked. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about, but it was a kind of I'd learned to walk on the streets, and I was getting into trouble back in those days, so that was still there. So you're a postulant for 6 months. You're a novice. You're clothed all in white, like a Christmas, angel, a Christmas tree angel, for 2 years, and then they vote on you whether you are going to stay or not. And then you get 3 years as a temporary professed monk. That can be extended up to 9 years, canonically, legally speaking. And then you'll take your final vows. They vote on you again, and if you get enough votes, you will be solemnly professed. So that didn't happen to me in that monastery. Something else happened, and I had to move on. And I spent 2 years in Northern Ireland, still the Trappists. And then a Dutch abbess came and visited, and they do this kind of inspection. Different houses, there's a whole system with the Trappists, and different houses, independent abbesses and abbots will come and make sure in another house that everything's okay as an independent outside person, so that all the monks can go and see them and vent, shall we say, about what's going on in the community or what's not going on. And in these interviews, I got to know a Dutch abbess, and she saw the situation there was largely old monks. And she said, I think she felt sorry for me. She said, why don't you come to the Netherlands and you can stay with us while you look around to move again, because I was still a junior monk. So I said, yeah, why not? Why not? And that's what I did. And then I moved to another monastery in the Netherlands for the last 11 years. And that's where I was allowed to do this Buddhist training, because it was the only monastery in the order where the abbot was favorable towards particularly Zen Buddhism. So I was allowed to follow a training so that in the future I could give meditation retreats to the guests, which I did eventually.
Okay. So you combine the two faiths, if you
Yeah,
like, even then. Okay.
yeah, pretty weird. Yeah,
Wow, very, very cool. I mean, like we were saying before about things being meant to be or happening in a sort of synchronistic way, or
yeah,
different people have different interpretations, but basically one way or another, I personally think it is God's plan, however people term that, and that seemed to be obviously working out for you with this. Now I do have to ask as well. I mean, being a monk, and I've interviewed a number of monks primarily in the Buddhist tradition, but also certain Hindu traditions and other things. And obviously, the stillness and the silence. I mean, many of us living busy, hectic lives. I mean, it sounds lovely. You think, oh, I'd love a bit of that. But obviously, as well, it has the flip side of the many things that you have to renounce, not to state the obvious here. And you mentioned earlier, I hope this isn't too personal of a question, but I do think people will want to know also for the benefits of this. You mentioned about celibacy, and you mentioned about things you have to give up. But it's also not just that, it's also even things like what you eat, and having to eat what they say and things like that. And there's a lot of I don't know if hardships is too strong a word, but there are those more brutal aspects. I'd also like to get your thoughts honestly on coping with that, because I'm sure you learned a lot from it. But like you were saying there about being in the community where you may not like each other and people may rub each other up the wrong way. I've heard that also from the Buddhist communities as well. But I
mm,
think people will be curious about some of those other aspects of the things you have to renounce, and going a little bit deeper, including the silence, because you can't just say something when you want to say it, which is something I think that everybody pretty much takes for granted in day-to-day life. So with those manner of things, what were some of the lessons you learned from giving up being able to say anything, eat anything, relationships, and some of the aspects that people, I suppose, would find almost a bit frightening if they were looking at potentially joining an order like that, if that makes sense.
sure, yeah. It makes a lot of sense, because joining an order doesn't really make sense. It's kind of an irrational step that you'd only do because of love, I think. But Yeah, you will never, in my personal humble opinion, you will never do any good in community, never find any peace in community unless you learn to turn your eye inward, turn it around and stop putting it out on everyone else for your misery, and start looking at, why am I upset about this? What is it about him that upsets me? Or even, he's upset with me. Why does it upset me that he's upset with me? If he's upset, it's his problem. So there's lots of things you can learn on that. Silence is a beautiful one because it's something you can learn. And when I remember my first months in the monastery, I used to, I was young, I would kind of bounce up to old monks like this, hi, and they would just like not respond in the same way. And if you're in a conversation, um, you were like a junior monk. You almost didn't exist. Your opinion was not asked. You were definitely riffraff. Riffraff's the wrong word. You were definitely not hardly appearing on the radar screen, if you know what I mean. These are guys who've been in there 30, 40 years. So that put you in your place straight away. And I had to learn, even when I did say something, I had to learn how to say that in a gentle and not too energetic way, because it just wasn't appreciated. It wasn't appreciated. Neither was appreciated if you had a better way of, you thought of a better way of doing things, say like a washing up system or something. This is the way we do it, brother, and you just have to get in line and do it. So there's a lot of humiliating experiences. In other words, things that bring you down to earth, that confront you with your own expectations and your own wishes. Um, Food, yeah. If you didn't eat it, you didn't get anything to eat. So and there was I remember one or two monks, they would not eat the food. There'd be a new cook would start, maybe a junior monk as well, and he'd serve up some more exotic meal, like spaghetti or some kind of pasta, and he'd put a little spice in there, and some monks wouldn't eat it. They would just go hungry. So, or they'd find something else somewhere else. So, as for celibacy, well, what can you say? That's a very personal thing. I believe that um, celibacy is really a soul decision. You may want to be celibate, but it doesn't mean you can be celibate. I think it's a deeply personal and a very deep decision of the soul, um, which makes the person flourish. It's something positive for them. But I think for the vast majority of us, monks included, it's not that. So there's a struggle going on there. And there's a kind of, there can be, I mean, you can get all kinds of variations of this. You can see where a person has maybe chopped off certain feelings in themselves, which leads to a certain hardness towards others as well, or certain lack of sensitivity. Um, There are others, I'm not going to categorize myself here, but there are others who are just really bad at it, and just struggle with the whole thing. So you've got everybody is except for a few few guys who seem to be built differently. They find that not such a problem. But I think for most it is a bit of a struggle, yeah, because it's a natural thing. It's a natural hunger, and the whole desire for intimacy, for being close as a human being to another human being. That's all difficult because traditional Trappists as well are not known. They are community people in a kind of a cold way. The old way was uh, um, all together, but all looking at God. Yeah, not really looking at each other, not really being warm, and to a certain extent. But in the old days, no, it was pretty tough. Yeah. So there will be collateral damage with all that, emotional damage, and you see that in monks as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, it's something that, I mean, even on a very simple level, obviously the integrity and everything of mentioning like both sides of the coin. I mean, even then, I think that's too simple. But in the time that we have, at least, mentioning the beauty and what you were saying, the unconditional love and the prayer and and some of the really lovely aspects, but also some of the hard aspects as well. I think gives people that real view. I appreciate you answering that, by the way, especially as I said before, everything that I speak about has a purpose, and obviously whether people become monks or not, some of what you've been talking about with this, with humility, forgiveness, being brought back down to earth, the silence and everything. Obviously, the celibacy thing, I appreciate you answering that, because it's something that in the era that we live in as well, I really think that in the media, there's a lot of sexuality sort of thrust at people, and a lot of it comes from trauma and comes from the unhealed trauma of that. And I've certainly found in my own life that lust, if you like, comes primarily from trauma, whereas actually having a loving connection in a different type of way is much more from the soul. So as I said before, everything, nothing is really to be like, oh, I'm just going to sort of like probe into your life. It's always something I think, okay, that can help someone in this way, that can help someone in this way, even
Sure.
just giving them a fresh perspective. And obviously with the Zen training, or actually, I was saying that to take a backward step from that. Before we come into the Zen training, obviously, I've mentioned that going into the monastery or those different monasteries, a massive decision, adapting to it, changing so much as a person, down to the soul level, rediscovering yourself, but then coming out of it and coming back into the world as well is another massive thing that could potentially be even more daunting than going in. I don't know, or maybe equally as daunting. So, with that, I mean, the other thing is that you made the decision to come out, and as you mentioned before, a lot of people, I'd imagine, stay there. As you were saying, there's guys in there, 30, 40 years and everything. But you did make the decision to come out. And as I understand it from what I've read, that's a bit of a story in itself, which I think is very profound. Can we go into that topic a little bit of your decision to leave, please?
Sure, sure. That's an ongoing story as well, because there's a part of me that is still, the monk that has to learn how to enjoy things again, learn how to um, feel at home in the world. Um, yeah, as with those three things that before I went in, there's three things on the way out. One was a very clear dream that I had, showing me, amongst other things, that my place was outside the monastery, beyond the enclosure walls. Second one was Easter Sunday, 2009. I remember I was doing a walk in the woods. It's a place called a Sterabos. It's a star-shaped. It's like a wheel, yeah. So like a round wood with spokes of lanes going. I was in there before the main mass of the day, and I stopped to pick up a stone. And as I was, it's one of those slow motion moments, in the film when there's something deeply significant about picking up this stone. And I just, for the second time, or maybe on a different level, I it really dawned on me what it meant to be a father, or what a father's love, i.e., God, the unconditionality of it, to really feel that. And that meant that you're loved even if you don't give anything back, even if you don't become a monk, even if you do absolutely nothing and just become a couch potato for the rest of your life. It doesn't matter, unemployed or whatever. It just doesn't matter. Unconditional love is unconditionally given. So the theme again in my life, learning what this was, first encountering it, and then on a deeper level, discovering it, I knew in that moment that I didn't have to be a monk. And that was a revelation for me, huge revelation. At first, it was so big a message that I thought, oh, I can be a monk in an English-speaking monastery. So I was in Holland now. I was learning. I wasn't even using my own language, and there was that kind of homesickness sometimes for using my own language, if not for the UK, probably not so much for the UK, but so I was opening out more and more, but then it opened out completely to not being a monk at all, and it being okay, being and not changing the amount of or the nature of the love that was coming towards me. That was number two. That's still 2 years before I left, so that was still coming through. And then the last one was the discovery of, as we began today, the brother in the womb, and that I went to see a medium. I had a friend who, as a birthday present, which we never celebrate in the monastery, but outside they do. So she uh, brought me into contact with this medium lady, a friend of mine, and she said, yes, you confirmed everything that I was discovering on my meditation cushion myself, and said, yeah, he was more the monk than you were. And you just wanted to bring him with you through that because you couldn't bear the pain of separation. And now this trauma, this pain was coming up, and I was separating. So she helped me do that as well. And but then the thing is, Liam, after all that, you're left with who then? Who the hell am I then? If that was him, uh, who who am I? So when I knew, again, as soon as I know the truth, believe I know that, see the truth, I'm out. I'm going to follow it. I seem to be built that way. I have to go for the truth every time, and then 100%, even if I make a fool of myself. So I was out, but then being outside, you know, the world has changed. Banks look like hotels now, and I had to use this little card in a little box. And I said, this is never going to work. This can't work. But it does work. It gives you access to, you know, your money and all that, and all these things I had to learn. But on the inner level, the psychological level, yeah, I really didn't have a clue how to proceed. A feeling I had growing up, because with life, I find life very crazy, insane almost. It's insane the way we all live, earning money, working as slaves, etc., etc. And I was out again. I was now 49, and it was back to square one, really. And the first year was tough, was very tough. So I'm already interested in Celtic Buddhism as a monk towards the end of my time, and I decided to follow that up because I still wanted to maintain that spiritual connection. It was still very important to me. The only thing that gave me meaning in life, and meaning was, a very important thing for me, especially as a young man. I had this kind of existential pressure on me all the time to kind of find meaning. I couldn't find meaning in this insanity that we called life. Uh, but I found meaning in its meaningless eventually. So, but at that stage, where am I? Where am I going? Yeah, I'm out of the monastery. I went to America to meet the guy from Celtic Buddhism, and after that, after some training there and an ordination there as well, uh, I ended up in Ireland trying to promote Celtic Buddhism, failing disastrously, and finding life very hard. There was a big gap there, big gap there. I remember I wanted to jump in the river. I was in Sligo, and I would struggle, yeah. But out of the mist, because we are looked after, we are guided. There is that presence is always there. Out of the mist came two very wonderful people. One just to have coffee with me once a week, and the other guy, a retired social worker, I think he brought me out for a meal once a week, and that was enough to keep me going, just to chat.
That's wonderful. I mean, the bravery of coming out and facing the world again, and what you were saying there, how the world had changed so much. I mean, I think it's remarkable. It takes remarkable courage. I mean, to say, as I said earlier, that's also a theme. And I know, again, with this sort of thing, it's not us, as you say, we are looked after, and there's the guidance is there. But we still have to make the decision, and I think that's remarkable in and of itself. So Celtic Buddhism coming into the phase of Celtic Buddhism and the some of the shadow work and some of the other things you do. I'd like to briefly mention as well, just for anyone who's not familiar with this, how you actually define Celtic Buddhism itself. Now, as I said at the beginning, I'm not really a big fan of labels. I'm not really a big fan of putting things or people, for that matter, in boxes, because obviously what we're talking about today, they are experiential things or they are experiences. So you can't really put that in a box and say, well, it's this, and it has this, these dimensions and so forth, because it is experiential. But broadly speaking, there may be some people listening to this who are not familiar with Celtic Buddhism, or how the Celtic traditions and Buddhism blend together. So just so we don't leave them out of the loop, I would like to give a mention to what that actually means in your own words, please, as well. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think it's again different for each person you ask who is in or associated with Celtic Buddhism. Um, it's certainly a form of Buddhism for scoundrels and misfits and less traditional or orthodox people, because it combines the spirit of the Celts, which was passionate, a little wild, in tune with nature. It has a whole body of wisdom, that we're trying to rediscover now, especially that shamanically closeness to nature, which which brings me more and more in touch with writing. So when things are going well with me, I start writing, and when things are very good with me, then I start writing poetry, because I start seeing differently. But that aside, on the other side, there's Buddhism. And basically, in its essence, that is just the Buddhist message, the message of the Buddha, that life is full of suffering and there's a way out of suffering. So um, the threshold for becoming a Celtic Buddhist is very low, very, very low. And I love the quote by Shunryu Suzuki, who is a Zen guy, Soto Zen monk. He said, before I became a Buddhist, there were Buddhists and non-Buddhists. After I became a Buddhist, I saw that everybody was already a Buddhist, even the bugs. So it's really a description of life uh, in its real, in the facts of life, that we are born into this dream and that we can suffer here, but we can escape. But that we also die. There's the three friends of the Buddha, the three companions, were birth, old age, and death. And Buddhism is a reaction, the Buddha's, Prince Siddhartha's reaction to seeing these three things, which for him, as for me, were deeply shocking. Deeply shocking. How can you die? How can a God be kind if he brings you into a world to die? It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So the traditional forms of Buddhism also don't really have an answer on these existential questions. So I had to look a little further than Celtic Buddhism, even into even past shamanic wisdom, into non-duality, before I could get an answer to those bigger questions.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful description as well of the combination. And personally, I also find this relatable as well because on my own journey, there's certainly a lot of elements of Buddhism, but I've also been involved in spiritualism as well, and the shamanic paths, and there's aspects of Christianity that I still believe, but I'm still sort of figuring out the blend. So I'd like that aspect of your journey just on a personal level. I feel many people will relate with that as well. So Celtic Buddhism, and obviously the shadow work here is a big part of your journey as a terminology, broadly speaking, as I understand it, for the parts of ourselves that we deny or repress or don't acknowledge, or they're not inherently
Yeah, yeah,
bad or shadowy, as some people might think, but just not recognized. And certainly, I would say not loved usually. So they're not the unconditional love aspect
yeah.
come into this very strongly. But when did you engage with teaching that? Because obviously, you've been doing this work on your connection with God, but also your connection with self, and going back to what you said earlier, turning the eye inward and so forth. When it comes to making the decision of saying, okay, I'm not just like if I put myself in your shoes for a moment, I'm not just looking inwards now, but I'd like to share aspects of what I've learned inwardly with others, if that makes sense, and put this out there a little bit. I mean, I think that's a very, very powerful and a very wonderful thing to guide people. And I read um, on your website or somewhere online about how you're guiding people through these layers of self and layers of consciousness. But again, as we were talking about earlier with going into the monastery and the decision to do that and so forth, the decision to, I was going to say share knowledge, but in many ways it's more than that, to share your experience with people. When did that actually come about, or how did that actually come about, please?
Yeah, I'd say sharing your being, essentially sharing your being, sharing your time,
Absolutely.
and showing people what time means. That joining someone in timelessness, how that can affect time. That's another story. Yeah, I can tell you very clearly. Um, well, I went to work eventually in the Netherlands, and I started giving evenings once a week of meditation, and then a chat afterwards. But it kind of started in the monastery when I was leading the guests as a source of income for the monastery. And I was very pleased with myself to be able to give a 15-minute talk every day uh, in Dutch, with just having thought about it, say like a few minutes in the cloister walking up and down before. Uh, I like being in the spotlight to a certain extent because it makes me produce, and then I have to produce what I'm living. Yeah. So if I wasn't living this, if I wasn't being um, if there was no integrity, there was no authenticity in this, if I wasn't really living what I'm talking about, I would be shuffling the papers. I would be panicking, or, I would. You can tell when somebody isn't like that. So I didn't want to be like that, and I had no interest in that at all. Um, so it's the whole path, or the teaching side of it, has come from just wanting to share what motivates and gets me excited, because we all have to find something that is connected to our longing and to our passion. And my longing is to go home, to be at peace, in nirvana or heaven or whatever you want to call it. And my passion is to help people, is for me to get there. Yeah. It's right here. There's nothing to get. It's just making it, it's being able to access it, what we actually already are, and where we've never left. Yeah. We're having a dream. It's a reversal of our normal way of ego way of thinking, but also to help other people. Because who are they? They are me. They are just a different aspect of myself. So everything I say to you or to anyone is really, I'm talking to myself. I'm talking to, uh, like the statue of Milarepa, if you know that. There's a statue, and he's always like this. He's listening to the words that come out of his own mouth because he doesn't know what's coming next, and it's not from him. It's from something in us that is always present, and so fully, massively present. We hardly have the faintest idea of how supported we are, how loved we are, that unconditional love again, how deeply uh, cherished we are.
Absolutely. That is powerful. I mean, coming back to what we already have, I mean, it's a wonderful, wonderful understanding in and of itself. And for people listening to this who would like to connect more deeply, or I will say actually, particularly with the shadow side of things, I feel that it's misunderstood. Um, Frankly, I'm going to say I feel it's commercialized as well a lot of times these days, or not only shadow work, but the whole shamanic path is, people seem to appear frequently, whereas obviously because you have all of these years of experience and practice, and you have this ability to share your presence with people in such a meaningful way. I know if people would like to know more about this, they should contact you directly, and we'll mention that at the end. But what would be one or two steps that you would like to share with people who are a bit confused with maybe where to start with shadow work, or maybe if they've started but they don't know how to continue, because obviously there are parts of the journey where you think, well, can I go any further,
Mm,
or will I just go back? Or, as you said about the river in Sligo, I mean that obviously also occurs to us all at certain times, because you think, can I go through this next layer? But obviously, so I know it's a very broad topic, and it's not really something that we can narrow down too much in sort of just a few
mm,
minutes on this topic here. But if there were any words of advice that you'd share with anybody watching this who's going through the shadow process, what would they
mm.
be, please? And I'm sorry, it's a big question.
No, not at all, not at all. We have to be practical about these things. First of all, I'd say it depends what you've got, what's in your bag, what's in your shadow. If it is too big, then you do need someone to be there with you, yeah, while you re-experience it. And as soon as you re-experience these things, they will transform, they will transmute, the energy will transmute. And as you suggested earlier, that our darkest things actually wrap something which is pure gold, which is very uniquely our gift. Yeah, so that was very, as a punk, I learned how to hurt people. I knew how to pierce their armor and get to them. Yeah, lots of psychological games. But that was the flip side from I now realize, now having, uh, as a good holy monk, put all that away. I had to get that out again, unwrap it. I had to take the sword off the wall, as I said, and get the edge back. That can be your sharpest gift of compassion, because you know how you know, to penetrate someone in that way, to really join them in their spirit in that way. But so some help is sometimes needed if you've got a lot of stuff going on, if there's a lot of complexity and it's really wrapped up. For most people, I'm beginning to realize they're not all like me, that I think they could start with a little bit of meditation, a little bit of quiet. And then I don't mean smoke and music, and I mean just sitting in silence and feeling your body breathe. It's like stepping back. This is very much the poet's movement as well. Stepping back out of your life and looking at it, looking at the sun shining through the window and catching a drop of water and it gleaming. These wonderful, this richness that we can find, and that rationality and ego striving, competing, and getting on in life and being so we forget all that in that stream. So to chill out, spend some time with yourself, to maybe meditate, try not to think at all, thinking of not thinking. And I would say it doesn't have to be a kind of sitting meditation. You can go for a walk in the woods. I would say get off your phone scrolling, death scrolling. Don't do any more death scrolling. Don't watch inane, mind-numbing TV all the time. A bit of TV is great. I mean, it relaxes you if you're stressed out. But don't use all these exterior things to fill in the gap that we feel in our hearts. Let's be warriors. This is also Celtic. The Celtic warrior, yeah, who is brave enough to face what's inside him, or the lack of feeling, because we often fill ourselves like hungry ghosts with other things because we can't abide this gnawing feeling of being empty and inadequate and unloved inside. And there comes a time when we need to face this, and we need to find the way to abundance inside, to wealth, the inner wealth of presence. Be there for ourselves.
Absolutely. So wonderful wisdom there, and I just had the feeling to ask you that, as I said earlier, because I also listen to little bits of intuition that obviously come as you're doing a talk like this, and obviously in day-to-day life as well. But I just had the feeling that there are a few people listening to this who need to know, and the shadow work is so valuable. Recently, I saw a quote, actually, only in the past few weeks, by a Buddhist teacher, um, James Ishmael Ford, I think is how you say it, but I might be mispronouncing that. And he said, I found myself broken open and found in that opening my fundamental connection with the whole world. And even though it's just a simple couple of lines, I thought, wow, I mean, that really resonated with me and my own journey. But it's very poignant of you to share that. Now, I also we'll have to wrap up shortly, as I'll have to go
Sure, yeah.
fairly shortly. But I would like to obviously give a mention in the purely practical sense of how people can contact you. Obviously, I connected with you on LinkedIn. I know your website is out there, and I know there's a lot more that you do, because today we haven't really talked about the koan training, your involvement in funerals and being a celebrant, the book. So I know in a lot of ways we've sort of scratched the surface, but at the same time, when I had this in mind, I had this sort of interesting stories that people will be curious about being a monk, and then the lessons that you've learned along the way. And obviously, we've ticked those boxes and then some. But if people want to go a bit further into this process with you, as a guide, how can they reach out to you, and what's the best way for them to go about that?
They can always ring me, of course, but my preferred thing is email, and then we can get on to chatting, and yeah, I would always start with someone where they are, not where they don't have to fit to my training program or whatever. No, it starts with them, and it depends on what they want and how I can help them.
Absolutely, absolutely, it does. I mean, I know that you're coming at this from obviously such an authentic place of pure presence with people, and guiding them through. Well, there's a very eloquent description on your, I think it's on your website as well, which I will say to people to have a look at, about how you guide people through the layers. And I think it's such a wonderful calling. I was going to say job, but it's much more than that. It's such a wonderful calling that you have to help people in such a way. I think it's absolutely fabulous, because with everything else being said and all of the other things that we've spoken about, even though this is a little bit of a cliche these days on social media, the ripple effect is obviously very real. I mean, as you were saying earlier, we're all connected, and as you're healing other people, yes, you're healing yourself, but also the work that you're guiding them to do within themselves then extends out to the way they interact with other people and other people, and it really is exponential. So I think that that is an incredibly well, it's a beautiful position to be in. As I mentioned, we've talked about some wonderful topics today. I know we haven't talked about everything, but I really think that there's some guidance and some um, it's more than knowledge. I feel that from the experiences and from your presence that you shared today, not only with myself but with everyone listening, people will gain from that. And going back to what I said right at the beginning, people will be able to think, okay, or more than think, people will feel, okay, there's perhaps another path I can be taking here. Maybe there's another way of doing things. And then how that manifests for them, I mean, that's between them and themselves, between them and God, between what they allow themselves to be guided towards and so on and so forth. But just that little opening in the darkness so that little bit of light can get in and they can think, okay, maybe I could do something differently here. I mean, it really is an honor on my part to be able to talk with you and create a space where that's possible for them. And by that, I mean that the space not only that we've created in linear time, but obviously as this is posted, that can then go out and people can watch it and listen to it whenever they want, and that still creates that space for them to develop. So I just want to thank you very, very much for speaking from your heart, for being an open book, for talking about such personal things that you've spoken about today. The dark and the lights and the highs and the lows of your life. I know that those are only perceptions, but nonetheless, it is still brave to speak about them. So just thank you so much for all those things, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam. Thank you, Liam. You're a very warm and open person yourself, and
Thank you.
sure you'll make a full recovery and do. And I hope you keep up this kind of opportunity for us, for others.
Well, I'll do my best. It's definitely something that life led me to. I mean, we didn't really get into that, but I had a different background as a photojournalist and various other things I was doing before doing this kind of work. And I'd interviewed people on and off, but there's a long story, basically, synchronistically, how I came to be doing this kind of podcast. And I believe it's meant to be. It certainly was never an ego thing. If I sat down and thought, oh, I'm going to do this, it developed. And even then, it changed form from what it originally was. So I hope to do this for a long time because when I get those messages of how it's helped people and touched their lives, that makes it worthwhile. And it's not me. I mean, it's just me being able to ask the right questions, but everything else is people like yourself who take the time to do this as a form of service and as a form of contribution. So I really do appreciate that. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the Simply Inspired YouTube channel, and there'll be more videos coming soon.